let's get started. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. So, tonight we're going to begin with existence and being. And in the RCIA, right, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, we talked a little bit last time in our little meet and greet about how this is the way that we prepare, especially adults, to come into the church. A lot of times a child will be baptized, and so they'll be baptized soon after they're born, and they don't make that decision to receive baptism. Their parents make that decision. But for some of you, it's your decision that you're making to be baptized and to come into this relationship with God. And baptism along with Holy Communion and confirmation. Those are the three sacraments of initiation. These three sacraments. And baptism is a once and for all sacrament, okay? One time. Confirmation is a once and for all sacrament. One time we're confirmed. Whereas Holy Communion is repeatable. We can receive Holy Communion repeatedly, and in fact, after baptism, if we are old enough, especially as adults, to be responsible for sin, for being disobedient to the will of God, we need to go to the sacrament of confession or reconciliation, to be reconciled to God and to our neighbor. And we need to do that before we go back to Holy Communion, because that will restore us to the state of grace that we received at baptism. It restores us to that baptismal grace so that we're in that state of grace to be able to receive communion. And we'll go more over the sacraments individually in another class. But I just want you to know this is what this class is preparing for, right? And some of you are in here doing marriage preparation too, and so we'll talk about the sacrament of holy matrimony and all that, and this will be marriage preparation also. So my class will cover everything, okay? But if you're going to come into a relationship with God, if you're going to begin this journey of faith, then it's reasonable to ask the question, right? Where are we going to begin? By asking this question, does God exist? Is it even reasonable to say that God exists? Well, we can answer that from a theological standpoint, and we can say, well, this is what the faith teaches us, and this is what the faith says. But even before that, because we're really asking, is it reasonable? We're really asking about reason, okay? So we have two things here. Reason and faith. We can say, well, you can accept it on faith, and I think that that's probably where everybody in here is now, although some people who come to RCIA might not be, and that's why I start here. That we accept in faith that God exists, that's already something that we have taken as a given. But let's look at how reasonable it is to say yes to that question. And so that means we're going to be looking not just at theology on the faith side, but we're going to be looking at philosophy, reason. Okay? Philosophy is the underpinning, the foundation of our theology. We do not have an unreasonable faith. We do not say it's just faith alone. Okay? Like Martin Luther did, right? Faith alone. No, we say we have a reasoned faith. We have a reason, and that's what St. Paul talks about. In the New Testament, he says, always be prepared to give a reasoned defense of your faith. So reason or philosophy is the foundation on which we build our faith or theology. Now these words, philosophy, literally means in the Greek, philosophia. Philo is love. Sophia is wisdom. This is a love of wisdom, right? Philosophy. Theology Theos is God in Greek. And whenever you see me put this little GK period, that means I'm talking about Greek. LTN period, if I put that up there, it's Latin. HEB period, if I put that up there, it's Hebrew. I'm talking about where these ideas come from, because it's important to understand the language that we're speaking. Because when we start describing the faith, we're using certain terms in language, especially philosophical terms that come from the Greek language, because Greece was the empire that had influenced the world right before the time of Christ. The Romans are coming into power. They are establishing themselves as the new world leaders, but they haven't taken over. Their influence hasn't taken over from the Greek influence of language and art and culture and philosophy. This love of wisdom, this reason. So the New Testament itself is written by the apostles in Greek. The early church fathers, as they are defining the doctrines of the church and what we believe in theology, what we believe about God, are using Greek philosophical terms. So it's important that we understand this foundation in Greek philosophy so that we know and have a better understanding of what the church is teaching in its theology. So literally, theos means God, logia means study of. So you may be familiar with other words like that, like biology. Bio means life, logia, the study of. So biology is the study of life. When you take a course in biology, you're studying life. Plant life, human life, right? This is the study of God, theology. Okay? Theologia. Faith and reason are not opposed to each other. Faith and reason, as the Catholic Church views them, work together. We don't say things in our faith that are unreasonable. Faith and reason have to work together. Now, that doesn't mean that everything can be explained by reason or by science, because it is limited in what it can explain, the questions it can answer. But it gives us the foundation to then take the next step into theology. When we talk about does God exist, this question, reason can tell us, yes, God exists. Okay? Reason can tell us that God exists. Okay? But reason cannot tell us who God is. It is by faith that we can understand better who God is. Because God reveals himself to us. And how he reveals himself to us explains who he is. That's not a question that reason or science can answer. Reason can get us to the point that we know God does exist, but we have to then make that transition to faith to figure out, well, what do we say about who God is? How has God revealed himself to us? So they answer two different things, but they work together. So who are some of the great Greek philosophers? Socrates is one. Plato. And Aristotle. And those are the three that we're going to look at. Okay? Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Now, we don't have anything directly written by Socrates himself. What we have from the dialogues of Plato is Plato writing about his teacher, who was Socrates, and telling us what Socrates taught. And that's in the dialogues. He forms this, what is called the Socratic method, of asking questions and exploring the answers to those questions, and then coming to truth, reasoning his way to truth. So that's what we call the Socratic method. And that's what I hope to do in this class, is ask questions, pose questions, and work together toward coming to the truth of what it is that we believe. So Socrates, through Plato, right, reveals to us these categories. Of matter and form. And that's going to be important, especially when we talk about the sacraments, because every sacrament has matter and form. So what do we mean by this? Matter is the material, the things that we see in the material world. Okay? What is readily available to our senses? What are our senses? Right? Taste. Somebody said smell. All right. Hearing. Touch. So, and what?
Seeing or vision.
Right? Seeing. So these are the 5 senses. Taste, smell, hearing, touch, and seeing. This is how we interact with the material world. So all of this stuff around us is matter. The material world, the visible world. Form, on the other hand, is more like what Socrates or Plato would say, the ideal world, or the realm of ideas, as opposed to the material world. So let's take this table as an example. So what is the material of this table? What is the matter? All right? Did you say it? Plastic. Okay, this happens to be plastic. What if it was made of wood? Would it still be a table? What if it was made of metal? Would it still be a table? Okay, so the material doesn't change what a thing is. It can be made of all sorts of different materials. So it can't be the material that makes it what it is. There are other things that are made of plastic. Is everything that's made of plastic a table? No. There are other things made of wood. Is everything that's made of wood a table? No. Of metal? Is everything that's metal a table? No. So the matter, it doesn't matter what the matter is. It's not the matter that makes something what it really is. So what makes this a table? If it's not the plastic or the metal or the wood, it is the form, the idea. We recognize the form, okay, that manifests itself in the material world in a particular shape, a particular style. We recognize when we see something, oh, that's a table. Well, this table is long and skinny and rectangular. What if it was circular? Would it still be a table? Yeah, we can still recognize the form. So even the shape is not necessarily, okay, limited to the form of something. There is a wholeness. It's more than just one thing. So you could have a triangular table. You could have a square table. You could have a rectangular table. You can have a circular table. Okay? Bless you.
Thank you.
It's the overall form. And we can have an idea of what a table is in our head that is not necessarily any specific example of a table. We have an idea that we might call tableness. There is something that we can understand as tableness. And when I look at this table or that table over there, I recognize tableness in those things. But they are only particular examples of table. None of them is the ideal table. The ideal table exists up here in our mind. But Socrates, through Plato, would say, that's more real than any particular material or physical example of a table. Because what is going to happen to this table and that table and that table? Eventually, they will break down. Eventually, they will decompose. Eventually, they will no longer hold that form of tableness because they are made of matter. And matter tends toward entropy, right? We can bring some other scientific explanations in here. Entropy is the process of things going from order to chaos, including elements, right? Compounds, all the things of the material world eventually will break down to their simplest state. And to understand entropy, all you have to do is have a child that has a bedroom. No matter how many times they clean the bedroom, it will always go from order to chaos, okay? It will never spontaneously go from chaos to order. You have to intervene and reorganize the material in that room. The clothes, right? The toys, the bed, the sheets and the pillows. You can put everything in order, but it will return to chaos over time. That is a consequence of the passage of time. Everything in the material world, given enough time, then will break down. not just go from order to disorder, but we'll actually start breaking down into compounds, to elements, to atoms, right, to the simplest forms. So Socrates and Plato would say the ideal is something that is eternal. The ideal is eternal. The idea of a table will always be there, even if every particular individual example of a table breaks down, decomposes, suffers from entropy. So that's why they would say the ideal world, or the realm of ideas, is an eternal realm, and it is more real than the material world. It must be better because it is eternal. Therefore, it's more real than even the material world that we taste, smell, hear, touch, and see around us. Okay? So that's the first principle of this understanding of what we mean by matter and form. Aristotle would build off of this, sort of going the other way round. Instead of looking at the ideal and then bringing that down to particular examples, the idea of tableness down to this table, Aristotle would start from the bottom up and say, let's look at the world and observe the world around us and build up. What observations can we make about the things that are in the material world, and then how can we build up to what is the ideal? But he would use different terms. He would use terms of substance and accidents. And he would say, what is substantial, literally to stand under, or to have an understanding of what a thing is. That's its substance, what stands under the things that we might see from the outside, the things that we might observe from the outside, to really get down to what a thing is, to understand it. So that's what substance. What a thing truly is. To understand what a thing truly is. That's what he means by substance. Accidents are all of the things that you can use to describe these different things, but that don't make any difference about changing it from being one thing into another thing. Okay? Color. Does it matter if the color of this table is gray or black or blue or brown? Does that mean it's no longer a table because it's a different color? No. So he would say something like color is an accident. Okay? He would even say number. Does it matter if there's one table or two tables or three tables? Does that change that they're tables? No. So even number, right, countable numbers can be accidental. All right? In fact, what he would say is most of the things that we have from our five senses, taste, smell, hearing, touch, and what we see, most of that information that we gather is accidental information. Does it matter what color my shirt is? No. Does it matter how many shirts I have? No. Does it matter what size my shirt is. Does that change it from being a shirt? No, it can be a really small shirt, or, in my case, might need a larger shirt. It doesn't change the fact that it's a shirt. We can understand that it's a shirt. We can understand that it's a table. No matter what the color or the number or the size is. Most of the things that we can observe with our senses are accidental. It doesn't change what a thing is. So these are the categories I want you to be familiar with. And like I said, they're going to be important when we start talking about the sacraments, because every sacrament has matter and form. And the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, has things that we call substance and accidents. And it's important about what we believe and why we believe it. Okay? So that's just to give you that little underpinning. And we'll see how that comes back when we go more into the sacraments. So let's jump back now to our question. Does God exist? What did the philosophers have to say? And when are they saying this? What time period are we talking about in history that is the time in ancient Greece of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle? Roughly. Yes, it is before Christ. So we would say BC, right? When we're talking about a time before Christ. How many years before Christ? $400. 400 years before Christ is the time of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, roughly speaking. We're talking about 400 BC. 4 centuries before the birth of Christ. And at this time, they are coming up with this idea, not just coming up, but they are expressing this idea, especially Socrates, looking at this question, does God exist? Well, if it's reasonable to believe in God, we have to look at a few things. What do we mean when we say God? What do we mean? Let's define our terms. What do we mean by God? Because what is Greece and the kingdoms or the empires that had preceded it at this time in world history when it comes to religions? They are polytheistic, okay? From the Egyptians to the Assyrians to the Babylonians, the Greeks themselves, and the Romans after them, even in the time of Christ, the Empire of Rome, they are all polytheistic. Right? Poly means many in Greek. Many, do it with a lowercase g. Many gods. They believe in many gods. Who are some of the Greek gods or goddesses? Zeus, right? Poseidon. Okay, Hades, Athena, because she is actually the goddess of wisdom. And where is this philosophy, this love of wisdom, and these philosophers, where are they in Greece? They are in Athens, a city that is named for Athena, right? In Athens, Greece, a city named for Athena. So they are polytheistic. They believe in many gods. They ascribe many natural phenomena, like the rising and the setting of the sun, to the gods. It's Apollo. It's his chariot, the sun going across the sky, right? So they are a polytheistic society. But the philosophers, especially Socrates, begin to ask this question: is it reasonable to believe in the gods? And what do they come to? They come to an understanding, well, we have to define what we mean by God. Okay? St. Anselm would sum it up by saying, this, okay, which is basically what the philosophers come to. That which nothing greater than can exist. The greatest thing that can exist must be God. If God exists, then God must be the greatest thing that can exist. Nothing can be greater, because if there was something greater than that, that thing would be God. And the lesser thing wouldn't. Does that make sense? If you can say, well, this is what I mean by God, but there's something greater than God, you haven't defined God. You're defining something lesser than God by definition. St. Anselm would put it this way much later, but it's a good way to think about it: that which nothing greater than can exist. Because when we're talking about this, does God exist? That's what this session is about: existence and being. And that's what the philosophers are looking at. So they're saying, if that's the case, then can there be multiple gods? Who's greater, Zeus or Apollo or Poseidon or Athena? Can they all be equal? Can they all be gods? No. The philosophers say no. If God exists, God must be one. There can only be one God. Nothing greater than that can exist. So there can only be one God. This idea of one God is called monotheism. Mono in the Greek means one. Monotheism, as opposed to poly, which means many. So right away they say, well, if it's reasonable to believe in God, if God exists, there can only be one God, so polytheism can't be right. It must be monotheism. And Socrates got into a lot of trouble over that. In fact, because it was a polytheistic society, and because the gods played such a large part in the societal relationships of people, then the state charged Socrates with corruption of the youth for teaching monotheism. And they sentenced him to death. And he was killed by being forced to drink hemlock. Okay?
What is that?
So it's a poison.
Okay.
So it's just a natural distilled poison from a plant. So he was sentenced to death, and he drank hemlock because he was teaching monotheism. But that's what he said. It is reasonable to believe that if God exists, God must be one. What else did they say about God? Right? What are some attributes that we can ascribe to God that flow from this? If there can only be one God, is God powerful? Right? Wouldn't that be a good definition from God? He's powerful. Is he very powerful? Is there something more powerful than God? No, there can't be. Otherwise, that thing would be God. So God must be omnipotent, all-powerful. Omni means all, potentia, right? Potency, powerful, all-powerful. Is God wise? Does he know things? Does he know things more than we would know? Is there anything that could know more than God? So God must be omniscient, all-knowing. Is there anything outside the presence of God, the purview of God? Is there anything hidden from God? Right? Is there any place that we can be where God cannot be? Right? Where we can hide ourselves away from God? No. So God must be omnipresent, right? All present or everywhere. Now, they would talk about certain transcendentals. In philosophy, the great philosophers talk about transcendentals, things that transcend our reality, things that have an existence in themselves. Truth. How many truths can there be? Is there my truth and your truth? Or is there just the truth? There is the truth, one truth, right? Now, I may have part of the truth, and you may have part of the truth, but at the end of the day, there can only be one truth, okay? So it follows this same principle of oneness, right? So that's what the transcendentals come out of, this oneness, right, of truth, goodness, and beauty. The transcendentals. So they would say the good, what is ultimately good, not just good in some circumstances, or this is better than that, not just a feeling of good, right? Or anything that would be like from our senses, like, oh, pizza tastes good. Well, you may say, no, it doesn't. To me, it tastes bad. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the accidentals of our own taste buds, okay? We're talking about goodness itself. The very idea, the eternal idea of goodness, that there is good. And there is an ultimate good. And so if God exists, then he must be truth itself. He must be goodness itself. He must be beauty itself. Okay? And by beauty, again, we're not talking about, oh, I like the way that that looks and you don't like the way that that looks. And, you know, you've heard the expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, that's all accidental beauty, right? I like the way that this looks or that looks. That's all accidental. We're talking about beauty itself. So this oneness, truth, goodness, beauty, these transcendentals, these omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, right? There must be one God, and these are attributes that we can ascribe or how we can help describe God. This is what the philosophers come up with. Okay? So they say, does God exist? The answer to that question for the philosophers is yes. They can tell us that God exists. They can even describe some of the attributes about what we mean when we say God. But they cannot tell us who God is. That's where philosophy, reason, science, right, reaches the end of its realm of expertise. There has to be something beyond science. What Aristotle would say was there is the physical world, right? You can describe the physical world. This is the whole category he has of physics, right? You can study physics. You can study things in the physical world. But Aristotle also wrote another book called the Metaphysics. He says, literally, that means beyond physics, after physics. There is something beyond the physical world, something that is metaphysical. Now, in theology, what would the word be that we would use to describe that? We would say there's a material world, a physical world, but there is also a spiritual world. So we're talking about the same kind of thing, something beyond the physical world. The theological term, what we would say, is that there is a spiritual world. There is something that is transcendental, something beyond us. The spiritual. That would be the language of faith. The language of philosophy and reason would call it metaphysical, beyond the physical world. So philosophy can say yes to the question. Faith says yes to the question, but from a different approach. Faith because God reveals himself. God reveals himself. This is how faith answers the question, who is God? How does God reveal himself? Right? He reveals himself to Moses. What does he say?
Take off your shoes and
yes, but Moses says, who are you? Because Moses is in Egypt, which is a polytheistic belief in many gods. He says, who are you? What God are you? Are you Apis, the bull god, right? Are you some other god? And God says, I am who am. The great I am. Okay, and what is am? A derivative of the verb to be. So God is saying, I am being itself. I am being itself. Existence. I am existence itself, being itself. In theology, we say it this way: God's essence is his existence. His essence, right? That's another word for substance. What is essential? To understand God is to understand that God is being itself, existence itself, life itself. Everything that has life because of God. Everything that is brought into existence exists because of God. Is there anything in existence that is greater than God? No. Because God is existence itself. God brings into being all that we see, the visible world, right? And all that we don't see, the invisible world. All that is visible and invisible. We say that in the creed. Okay? The physical and the metaphysical. The material and the spiritual. God is the creator of all things, all life, all being, all of creation. That is why he is the creator, right? And everything else is the creation. The creator of all creation. Now, how would Aristotle describe this? Aristotle would say, you can observe in the world, remember he's about observing in the world. Aristotle would say you can observe in the world that things are in motion. And he would talk about the laws of motion. And that if a thing is in motion, it must have been put into motion by something else. Right? And that must have been put into motion by something else. And he said, you can go back and back and back and back, but you can't infinitely regress. Eventually you have to get to a beginning. Eventually you have to get to this right? If you observe all this motion, all these things that are moved, eventually you have to get back to an unmoved mover. One who moves but is not moved by anything else. One who begins the movement. All movement, all motion. He is the unmoved mover. This is what Aristotle would call God. Says when you're talking about God, what you mean is an unmoved mover. Right? Or an uncreated creator. If you see all of this creation, there has to be someone who is the uncreated creator. One who creates but is not created by anything preceding him. So this is the way that Aristotle would describe God. This unmoved mover, this uncreated creator. And St. Thomas Aquinas would come along later in the Middle Ages, and he would use Aristotle's philosophical descriptions as a framework for his theological work, the Summa Theologia. Right? In Latin, summa means everything or all. So his book was literally like all of theology. Here's a book on all of theology and where it comes from and what underpins it and the arguments for why it's reasonable to believe what we believe. The Summa Theologia. All about the study of God. So now that we can say, yes, it is reasonable to believe in God, and that reasoned belief can tell us that there must be one God, that God must be all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present, that God must be in himself truth and goodness and beauty, that God, as the philosophers would say, is this unmoved mover, this uncreated creator, right? That he has a metaphysical existence beyond the physical world. We can say all of these things about God, and then we can look at faith. We can look at faith and we can say, how then does God continue to reveal himself to us? He reveals himself to Moses by saying, I am who am. It reiterates that he is existence itself, being itself, life itself, but he continues to reveal himself to us. So this is what we call in faith, right? Revelation. This is revelation, how God reveals himself to us. So how does he reveal himself in the scriptures? What do we read? How does God reveal himself?
Like in the physical presence, like a burning bush.
Okay, well, he reveals himself to Moses in the burning bush and says, I am who am. But what else? What are some other examples of how God reveals himself? Eventually, yes. The ultimate revelation of God is the incarnation. The incarnation, right? But we have to understand, you said a particular word there, the incarnation of the Son. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean the Son? Well, it's because God reveals himself to us as a Trinity, or a triune God. So this is one of the first doctrines we're going to look at. The doctrine of the Trinity, the triune God. Okay?